Yo, what's going on, guys? I don't know how many of you guys watched my Yae Miko guide already or my Yae Miko review, but basically in it, I talk about how Yae Miko's constellations are ridiculously broken in comparison to her C0. I actually managed to C6 her on stream over at my Twitch at twitch.tv/Braxophone last night, and we got to play around with her at C6, but I still wanted to do a basic constellation breakdown just so you guys could visually see the difference between C1, C2, C3, etc. That way you guys understand exactly how much damage you're getting from each constellation. Now, I will say, there's a couple things about this that might change for you personally. The first thing would be that I'm not conducting this test with buffs. If I conducted the test with buffs, you'd still see a lot of increase in the damage output, but in general, it's just harder to set up and consistently test that many times with buffs because sometimes enemies run away from you, sometimes buffs expire right before you get the chance to do something. So today, the only buffs we're going to be getting are from her signature weapon. Now, you might be wondering, Brax, why aren't you using a free-to-play weapon for this test? The main reason is because I actually just don't have a free-to-play weapon leveled, and there's nothing I can really do about it. I could use Widsith here, but the thing is, Widsith also introduces too many variables with there being an attack percent, a damage percent, and an elemental mastery. And ultimately, I just really want to keep things as easy as possible to compare, so that way it's very streamlined, and so that I can be a credible source of information for you guys, just so you understand exactly what we're dealing with. So with all of that being said, we're going to talk about how much damage she does with her elemental skill and her elemental burst after each constellation goes off, just so you can see the damage comparison, because all of Yae Miko's constellations are damage increases except for C1, which ends up being an energy refund constellation, which is still very, very good for Yae and increases her damage in a full rotation, but not individual damage numbers. So without further ado, my name is Braxophone, and let's talk about Yae Miko's constellations. First off, I'm just going to read off what every one of these constellations does, just so you guys know what to expect when we activate it. But there are timestamps in the description if you want to skip right to the tests. Constellation 1 makes it so that every time you get an extra Thunderbolt with Yae Miko's burst, aka whenever you destroy a turret with her burst, Yae Miko will restore 8 elemental energy for herself. This can't be affected by energy recharge. At max, she can restore 24 energy for herself, and the reason for this is because her 4th Thunderbolt, or her initial hit, doesn't actually count as a Tenko Thunderbolt, that just counts as elemental burst damage. If we were measuring her damage over long rotations, or if we reduced energy recharge to go for more crit substats, then this would actually show a damage difference, but we're not going to do that today because there's just way too many variables on that. And as you guys know, I can't force myself to lose ER and gain crit while maintaining the same sets. That's just not going to happen. Her Constellation 2 makes it so that whenever you create a turret, its max level is increased to 4 and it comes out as level 2 by default. So ultimately you're getting up to that level 4 scaling on your elemental skill, and it ends up being very, very good. It also increases their attack range by 60%. So overall, it is a great quality of life and a great improvement to your damage. Constellation 3 increases their elemental skill level by 3, which is just going to be a big damage increase. Constellation 4 gives your entire party electro damage bonus whenever your turrets hit an opponent for 5 seconds. This bonus will affect Yae herself, so it is fairly good. Yae's Constellation 5 will increase her elemental burst level by 3, and Constellation 6 is going to make all of her elemental skill turret hits ignore 60% of enemy defense. This acts like the Raiden Shogun one, her Constellation 2 that makes her comparable to C6 units. It's really, really broken, so I anticipate that this C6 is going to be very broken as well. And now we can actually get into how much these constellations matter and how much damage they bring to Yae. So with all that out of the way, let's get started with C0. I did show the build for this earlier, but I took the build video after I had activated all the constellations, so my talent levels were actually 666, not 699, and so what you're seeing on screen now is talent level 666 Yae Miko. As you can see, on critical hit, her turret does 8,429 damage, and in total, if you add up her entire elemental burst as all crits, you're getting 92,896 damage. Now, these are going to be the baseline for what we compare everything else to, so let's go ahead and look at Constellation 1. As we just discussed, Constellation 1 isn't a direct damage increase, it's more of a damage increase in that you can take away some energy recharge from Yae and you can put that into crit stats, but how often your burst is up is completely dependent on your team comp and how much energy you're funneling, so ultimately I don't feel like it's fair to compare this because I'm not using full rotations or buffs in this video. So even though it is a huge quality of life change, we're not able to quantify that with numbers in a consistent fashion, so we're going to leave these the same as C0 stats, but just know that it is a very good constellation. But now let's take a look at Constellation 2, 2. This one is going to upgrade your turret levels and increase your turret range, but ultimately that one is more of a quality of life in something like Abyss, where you have enemies that are teleporting all around the map and you have to hit all of them. In theory, if you're playing Yae Miko right, range shouldn't really be that big of a factor for her turrets, and we're not going to add numbers for that. But you might notice that the damage from her turrets has increased a little bit. It's now 10,536 per tick, which is an improvement of about 25% from our Constellation 0. Moving on now to Constellation 3, this is where you just get some extra levels for your elemental skill, and this is going to increase our turret damage per tick by 21% from the previous constellation and by 52% from Constellation 0. This is a pretty significant jump. As you can see, it's doing 12k per tick now, almost 13k, so it does actually end up giving us a lot of bonus damage at C3. Keep in mind though, this isn't overall DPS, this is just damage per tick of her turrets. But with that out of the way, we can actually go and look at Constellation 4, which is going to be the one that gives us electro damage bonus after our elemental skill has hit an opponent. And this, for Yae Miko personally, ends up being a 10% increase from the previous constellation on turret damage specifically, making a 66% skill damage increase from Constellation 0. Meanwhile, your burst also benefits from this. As you can see, our numbers were a little bit higher, and the burst damage improved by 12% from the previous constellations, which all had 0% improvement. So it's just 12% at Constellation 4. Moving on now to Constellation 5, this one is going to increase our elemental burst level by 3, which in turn will increase our elemental burst damage. So this is going from talent level 6 to 9, and as you can see, the damage has increased substantially actually. From the previous constellation, there was about a 21% increase in damage, and now the total burst damage difference from Constellation 0 is 35%. So as far as the burst goes specifically, the increase isn't actually that big, but we are seeing a massive jump in totem damage, and you'll see an even bigger one here at Constellation 6, where you ignore 60% of enemy defense with your elemental skill hits. So as you can see here on screen, our Constellation 6 Yae is hitting 20k ticks of electro damage per second, and this is going to be a 44% increase in damage from our previous constellation. 44% from the previous constellation is pretty big, but when you add it all together, Constellation 6 ends up being a 140% damage increase on your turrets alone from Constellation 0, at least with the build that I'm running and no buffs. Now, it is worth noting that lots of things can affect this change. 140% in your turrets alone is pretty dang significant, but that can change depending on how many buffs you have, what your team composition is like, and the enemies that you're fighting. Now, once again, I'm not going to be calculating total damage difference because that would require a whole team setting, and there would just be so many variables that it would be nearly impossible to test this, and just better to math it. And honestly, I still feel like it is just better to math it, but the thing is, I had access to all these constellations, so I wanted to show you guys visually what you can expect from each one of them in a practical scenario as far as just Yae's damage. Now, when you're effectively playing her in Abyss, you're gonna be using buffs, and if you have constellations, those constellations' value will fall off a little bit. It's not gonna be a lot, but they will see a little bit less value just because when you're getting that much extra bonus damage on top of buffs, you do end up seeing diminishing returns in the long run, especially over a few rotations. With that being said though, you cannot deny that the damage increase for Yae Miko with Constellation 6 is absurdly big in comparison to her C0. Her damage overall might not be that of other C6 characters. In fact, it does feel like much less, but the idea that her overall DPS can double from C6 is kind of crazy, because while there are characters that have broken C6s that double their damage, there's also plenty of characters that are 5 stars that get maybe 30 to 50% bonus damage tops. And so for that reason, if you're wailing for Yae, you will be pretty satisfied with the increase at the very least. But I don't expect most of you to go for C6 Yae anyways. This is mostly just for those of you who are looking to see how strong her Constellation 1 and 2 are, and I can tell you that our Constellation 1 is definitely a solid constellation because not having to run as much energy recharge on her is super helpful just in general to improve her damage. Constellation 2 is in a pretty similar boat. It's a pretty significant damage increase for Yae, but if you're comparing her to Raiden, who's going to be coming up in the next 3 weeks, I wouldn't say that Yae's constellations are any better than Raiden's, because Raiden's constellations just make her absurdly broken, and though C0 Raiden is very strong, her Constellation 2 and 3 increase in damage are much better than Yae's Constellation 2 and 3. Now, as I mentioned in my guide, I would highly recommend going for Yae's weapon over Constellation 1 or 2, mostly because if you lose the 50-50 on Yae's weapon to the other weapon on the banner, that's going to be Jade Cutter. Now, of course, you always do have the 25% chance of not getting either of them, but the nice thing about the weapon banner is that pity is lower, and the odds of you losing the 75-25 are lower than you losing the 50-50. Honestly, your odds of getting a good weapon on the weapon banner are actually higher than you getting C1 of Yae Miko. So I know the weapon banner is a scam, but I really do think that the weapon banner has more value in it than C1 Yae Miko. That being said, it's completely up to you. I honestly, at the end of the day, don't care how you spend your primo gems, but it's just some food for thought. Anyways, you guys, thank you so much for watching this video. It took me a while to put it together and collect all the information, so if you would do me a huge favor and like the video, and if you feel like it, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below. It's completely free, and you'll see videos from the Braxphone channel just pop up in your feed. It's pretty neat. Anyways, guys, have a wonderful rest of your day, and good luck on your weapon banner or Yae Miko polls.